This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
And welcome in, folks, to the third ever edition of Open Mic Night. I am your host, Noah Taluki, and this week we're going to talk about the Pistons, and we're going to talk about our favorite Palace memories. We're going to speak to Rod Beard later on in the show, the Detroit News beat writer for the Pistons. And we're also going to talk about Troy Weaver and what he brings to the table as the Pistons' new general manager, as well as a little roster evaluation and seeing where some pieces fit on this team. And we're going to discuss who the Pistons should draft in this upcoming 2020 draft. And feel free to check out the first two episodes of Open Mic Night. Episode number 1, I got to interview Matt Dare. We talked about the Lions. And in episode 2, we interviewed Dan Dickerson of the Tigers and talked some Tiger baseball. So two exciting guests, and it should be a good one in this third episode. But first off, before we start talking about the Pistons, I wanted to give a quick shout out to 97.1 The Ticket's own Mike Valenti show, one of my favorite shows, listening to really throughout the last 5 years. Definitely my favorite sports radio show out there, and I've been listening to them really since high school, and it's been fun. It's a great show to listen to. Whether you hate Mike or not, it's a lot of fun, and they do a great job over there. Mike Valenti announcing just a few days ago that Rico Beard will join him now as his co-host. First time since Terry Foster left that he's going to be having a co-host full time. And I also wanted to give a shout out to Mike Sullivan, the fantastic producer of the Valenti show, and he is leaving 97.1 after I think 6 or 7 years there, first as an intern and now as a full-grown producer. He's leaving for greener pastures, getting out of radio. So I wanted to congratulate him on a great career at 97.1, and also to David Hatchet Hall, the call screener, who will now take Sully's place as producer. So it's a great show, and I've always enjoyed listening to it. And Sully will be deeply missed, that's for sure. But I'm excited for a new chapter of this Valenti show, and it should be an exciting one on 97.1 The Ticket. All right, now time for the Pistons talk, and I wanted to start it out by talking about the Palace for a minute. Now, because a lot of people are talking about the Palace because the final structure came down in Auburn Hills last week. So talking about some memories and talking about the Palace in general, here's my take on it. I've been to the Palace 2 times in my entire life. Never for a concert or anything. There were 2 Piston games. One was when I was like maybe 6, 7 years old. And the other one, I think I was in middle school maybe. And that was it. Those are the only 2 Piston games I ever attended in person. But from things I've read and pictures that I've seen, the Palace really was a great venue. It was a great place to host a concert, obviously a basketball game, and it was pretty state-of-the-art. I remember that last game I ever went to there, just looking around and thinking, wow, I think it was 25 years old at the time or something like that. For a 25-year-old arena, this actually looks pretty nice. And unfortunately, the Palace came down, and the Pistons now are playing, of course, at Little Caesars Arena. But, I mean, to be honest, from those 2 games that I attended when I was younger, I barely remember anything from those. I think the first game, I shot a free throw at the end of the game on the court. It was like kids shoot a free throw day or something like that. I can barely remember that, but I'm pretty sure I shot a free throw. But to be honest, that second game, I can barely remember anything from. So I don't know if anybody's in the same boat as me, but I don't really have many actual Palace memories from being at the arena. I barely ever attended Piston games. Like I said, only 2. And I'm from downriver, so going up from downriver to the Palace was a huge hike. So I think that's part of the reason why we never really went to a lot of Piston events, whether it was games or concerts or things like that, just because the drive was so long. You know, you get on 75 and then you run into traffic downtown. You run out more traffic when you get out to Troy and all that. And when you put it all together, it's just a really, really long day getting out there from where I'm from. So that's probably the reason why I never went out to the Palace much, and therefore I really don't have many memories of the place. I don't know if anybody's in the same boat as me, but that's just what I think of the Palace. Just not many memories for me, but there definitely were for a lot more people out there. You know, you think of the Bad Boys playing there, you think of the Going to Work Pistons, and a lot of those memories. Unfortunately, not a lot of them in the last 10 years or so, since the Going to Work era has ended. But we shall see. Maybe the Pistons will create some new memories at Little Caesars Arena, hopefully as good as the ones that were created at the Palace 15, 20 years ago and before. It's funny because I joke with my buddy sometimes, and I go to college at John Carroll University, which is just outside of Cleveland. He always jokes with me, and he says, "You've been to more Pistons games in Cleveland than you've been at the Palace or at Little Caesars Arena in your entire life." And I said, you know what? That's probably true. I try to make it out to Pistons Cavs when school is in session. So I to be honest, I probably have been to more Pistons Cavs in Cleveland than I have been any Pistons game at all at the Palace or Little Caesars Arena. So that's crazy to think about, but I guess more of my Piston memories are at the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, no longer the Quicken Loans Arena, than at the Palace or Little Caesars Arena. Now, I'll be honest, I don't watch the Pistons all the time, and I don't really follow the team very, very closely. I just never was into them in my time as a sports fan, but I will tell you this. I think the future is more hopeful now than it has been in previous seasons. And, I mean, let's face it, the last 10 years of Pistons basketball has been somewhat unwatchable. I mean, there's been bits and pieces here and there, some flashes in the pan, if you will, but, I mean, I know the Pistons have made the playoffs twice in the last 10 years, but, I mean, in my opinion, there just really wasn't a whole lot to see. I mean, you see Drummond down low in the paint, getting his routine double-doubles, but now that's a good thing that Andre's gone, because I did not like when Andre was on the team. I thought he was an old-school center, and he needed to be shooting the three-pointer a little bit more. It's funny because I would see him practice the three-pointer before those Pistons-Cavs games in Cleveland, and he'd be draining all these threes in the warm-ups, but then they would never have him shoot a three-pointer during the actual game. I just always thought that was funny. And I'm also happy that Reggie Jackson's off the books as well, because really, I mean, he was just so injury-prone, and the Pistons really, really need a point guard. We'll get to the draft section later, but I am confident about the future, in a large part due to the fact that the Pistons hired Troy Weaver as their general manager. Now, follow me here. The Pistons have not really had a general manager in the last couple seasons. It was really Ed Stefanski and Arn Tellem and Tom Gores all kind of collectively running the show, but they never had that one guy that kind of just handled the basketball operations completely. And I think that Troy Weaver is a great candidate. Obviously, we know that he came from Oklahoma City, who's had success in the past 10 years for sure. And he was, instrumental in drafting Russell Westbrook, who became one of the best players in the NBA during his time with the Thunder. And what I've been hearing is that he's just had an excellent eye for basketball talent. And really, I hope that translates well to the Pistons, and especially with that eye for young talent that he has with some of the players on the current team that could help build a roster for the future. Some of that young talent, including, Luke Kennard, who's a really good shooter, Christian Wood, who kind of came out of nowhere last season. The Pistons basically got him off the scrap heap, and also Bruce Brown, their second-round pick from a couple years ago. These guys have potential on this team, and watching them play, you can see that if you're a Piston fan, and at least what I've been reading on some of these guys. So it'll be interesting to see how Troy Weaver will make this roster hopefully into a contender. I would love to see the Pistons, be relevant like they were when the Bad Boys were around or when the Going to Work Pistons were around. I think Detroit deserves a great basketball team, and I really hope Troy Weaver can help make that a reality here in the city of Detroit. And one thing I hope that Troy Weaver can do well is work with Ed Stefanski, Arn Tellem, and Tom Gores, because, as I mentioned before, they've been kind of running the show the last few years. So it'll be interesting to see how well Troy Weaver gels with them in terms of the basketball decisions and maybe taking some of their advice and mixing it with his knowledge of talent and seeing where that goes. So it could be a very nice combination for the Pistons, and considering the future of the team and the young talent that they have, could be a recipe for success. So it'll be interesting to see. And then, some of the older guys that the Pistons have, obviously the big star, Blake Griffin and Derrick Rose. But here's my opinion on that. Now, Blake Griffin, when healthy, is a very, very good basketball player. And we've seen that with throughout really his time with the Pistons. Now, did I agree with the trade at the time? The Pistons did give up a lot. Tobias Harris, Boban Marjanovic, some draft picks, I believe, and to get, sort of an aging Blake Griffin with a lot of injury issues, I think it was sort of a ploy, or not a ploy, but a way to get people in the stands that first season. It really seemed like Blake was just there to get people's hopes up. But I will be honest, Blake has impressed me when with some highlights when he's healthy. But unfortunately, Blake Griffin just was not really 100% last season, and hopefully he can be healthy in the coming years to spark the Pistons. But he's not a guy, at least right now, that the Pistons should be building around. In my opinion, I think they should be building around Sekou Doumbouya. Now, he was drafted in the middle of the first round last year, 19 years old, from France, very raw player, but what I've been reading, he has a lot of potential, kind of to be like a Pascal Siakam that the Raptors found out of nowhere and kind of kept him stashed for a little bit so he could develop, and then he became just an absolute beast down low. And I think that's what the Pistons' plan is for Sekou Doumbouya. So we'll have to see how good he can become, because if he's the player that they say he's going to be, he's definitely a player that you build a team around. And so it'll be interesting. And then obviously some of the free agent market that the Pistons have to tap into as well, because there's a lot of holes on this team that they need to fix. So especially by drafting some players and hopefully getting the free agents in the mix will help build this team in a positive direction. And it's sort of the same situation with Derrick Rose. Obviously a great player back in his prime, was the 2011 MVP in the NBA, but really fell on hard times after he got injured, and then he kind of bounced around a little bit and had some spurts of success, and he did with the Pistons. He had some games where he performed very well, but he's 31 years old now, and it's really, I don't think that this consistency can last that long, and in some of those nice spurts that he had. So I think it's kind of on and off with Derrick Rose, but it's just a player. I think he's a player that really shouldn't be involved with the future plans. Obviously a great locker room guy, teaching the guys a lot of skills and lessons on the court, if you will. But I just don't think that he or Blake Griffin should be part of this long-term plan. And Troy Weaver's going to have to start from scratch one, and this draft will be very, very important for him coming up. And I'll be honest, looking at the players in this draft, I don't know if it's just me or if it's the basketball experts in general or everybody thinks this way, but I don't really see this as a really strong draft class. There's players here and there, but I don't see this as one of those drafts that's just stacked all over. So it's going to be important to see who the Pistons are going to draft, and they will more than likely have a top 5 pick in this draft. And really, if I'm the Pistons, I'm going with a point guard. And the Pistons have had many point guard problems in the last few years. Obviously, Reggie Jackson can't stay healthy. Derrick Rose is just kind of like a patch, and he has nice games here and there, but not one of those consistent players that you're going to build a team around. And so there's some players that the Pistons could draft, but one in particular I think is the right decision is LaMelo Ball. And a lot of people may say, well, he's only good because his father, LeVar Ball, as we all know, who's on TV and has the Facebook Live show and all that. He's just pumping his son up to make sure he's way better than he really is. But, I mean, at least some highlights that I saw of LaMelo, and I've watched the TV show before, and I've kind of followed him a little bit since his high school days in Chino Hills, California. But what I've seen is, especially when he was in high school, I saw that highlight of his. He would point to the half court line and pull up from half court and just drain it. I mean, in somebody's face. So when I saw him in his high school years, I always thought of him as just a guy that all he did was shoot. But when I saw his highlights with that team from Australia, the Hawks from Australia, the Australian Basketball League or something like that he's in, I saw him become more of a complete player. And some of that might have had to do with his growth spurt, because I remember him being a really short kid in high school. And then he grew. I think he's 6'6", 6'7" right now, which is a great size for an NBA point guard like him. And his ability to pass the ball has gotten a lot better, at least in what I've seen from Australia. And then, he's still a good shooter. He's on and off sometimes now, but I mean, I think he could be a good enough shooter to lead an NBA franchise. Obviously the defense is an issue, but I mean, I think over time that he can develop with that. And, obviously the whole media baggage that might come with him, with his father and LeVar and the whole family and the TV show and all that. But I think it's the right move for the Pistons to be drafting LaMelo Ball. And it's especially important that the Pistons hit on this pick, because they do not have a second-round pick, anybody for insurance or anything like that that could possibly be on the roster. So it's definitely important that Troy Weaver nails this first draft, and I think it should be a big stepping stone for the future of the Pistons and hopefully for the good. But if the Pistons had a second-round pick, I really, really wish, or I hope, somebody drafts Cassius Winston from Michigan State, the product of my high school, University of Detroit Jesuit. What a passer he is, and I'm really, really anxious to see where he goes. High IQ, basketball IQ, and just an overall great person to be around. So we'll have to see where Cassius goes, but I really hope that he goes to a great team that will really help him out, and a team where he could develop. So that's another point guard that I wish the Pistons could snag later, but unfortunately no second round pick. But I hope Cassius goes to a good team.
All right, and joining us now on Open Mic Night is Rod Beard, the Pistons beat writer for the Detroit News. And Rod, how are you feeling now that basketball, I know no Pistons are back, but at least basketball is back now in the NBA?
Yeah, it's still a weird feeling to see any sports that are going on now. I'm doing a little bit of Tigers too, and that's still weird. But to see the guys working out in the bubble and shooting hoops again is it'll take some getting used to. But once we get started in a couple of weeks, we'll be right back in the swing of things.
Absolutely. And so when you found out that there was going to be no basketball a couple months ago with the Pistons, the season canceled, just what was going through your head at the time? And, how did you feel during those couple months without it?
Well, it took some getting used to. We were in Philadelphia for that last game, and right after they had lost to the Pistons had lost to the Sixers, then the news of Rudy Gobert came out that he was a positive test. And it was just an anxious couple of minutes right after that, because it was still, well, hey, the Pistons had played the Jazz that same week, the Saturday before that. And so it was just thinking back and wondering what interactions you had, maybe with a player or with a coach, or did I interview anybody or anything like that. But then in the months since, it's still been just day to day, just trying to get through it and making sure my family's safe and friends are safe and healthy and things like that. But just like everybody else, just slogging it through, making the best you can out of every day and finding things to do to keep your mind occupied. And again, with sports coming back, it'll take some of that off.
Absolutely. So I just want to know, during that time, the Pistons did announce a new general manager in Troy Weaver. I wanted to know, what was your initial reaction when the Pistons first made the move? And how do you think he will help with the future of the organization?
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise that they were even looking for a general manager, and it probably shouldn't have been. It shouldn't have been because it was 2 years they had gone without one. But, generally you need someone who's going to do the day-to-day stuff. And Ed Stefanski had been doing a lot of that same function. And the day-to-day stuff, you want somebody on the ground who's going to do that stuff every day. And the Pistons just didn't have that on a day-to-day basis. So now that's going to be Troy Weaver. And looking at his resume, looking at what he had done in Oklahoma City, that's just a good program to come from where he had made such good trades and such good draft picks. And again, everybody points to the Russell Westbrook win as being the keystone of all of that. But identifying Russell Westbrook and saying he was going to be a breakout star was what Troy Weaver is most renowned for. And it came to pass. Some of the other draft picks the same sort of way that Steven Adams and Serge Ibaka, those guys developed into not superstars necessarily, but functional players. And to have a successful team, that's what you need, is a lot of functional players that are on that verge of being an all-star.
I just had another question about Troy. You see guys like, obviously Tom Gores, Ed Stefanski, Arn Tellem, a lot of voices in the room. How well do you think Troy Weaver will work with those guys up in the front office?
I think it'll work out well. One of the things they said in his introductory press conference was leveraging all of the talent that's there and all the experience that's there. And he doesn't know Detroit, but he knows that he has people who do. And Arn Tellem knows the community fairly well. Dwayne Casey knows the basketball side of things. Ed Stefanski is a good resource. But there are other people in the organization, too, that he can consult with. But I think this will be a time for him to start making basketball decisions on his own and kind of everybody else to his side, because if he's brought in to be the general manager, let him make his own decisions, certainly with consultation from other people, but let him make his decisions. And if people disagree with him, they can voice their opinions. But hey, this is the time to let this guy do his work, because the success that Oklahoma City has had and that he's had a hand in the past decade or so is irrefutable.
So when you see the roster that Troy Weaver inherited, you see, some older guys, obviously, like with Blake Griffin, Derrick Rose, but then you see some more younger talent, guys like Sekou Doumbouya, Luke Kennard, Christian Wood, some of those guys. So how much faith do you have in the young talent of this team moving forward?
Well, I think that's going to be one of Troy Weaver's biggest decisions. Is he's known for having that eye for talent. And so he's got to sift through that and see if Luke Kennard is really a corner piece for the future of this franchise, that Sekou Doumbouya, Svi Mykhailiuk, Bruce Brown, where those guys fit and if those guys fit. And it might be a situation where some of them get traded away. It might be somewhere they just get relegated to a more of a reserve role and not as many minutes or not as big of a role as they've had in the past year or two. I think those are pieces to work with. And again, you'll give them time, give them playing time, and it might be another year or two before you really make a definitive decision on all of those guys. But I think he's the right person that has the basketball acumen and can say, this is a fit to the puzzle that we're trying to put together, or this piece just isn't going to work.
So pretty soon the NBA draft is going to happen, and a lot of different players that the Pistons could choose from. They're definitely going to have a top pick for sure. Who do you think that the Pistons should be targeting in this upcoming draft?
Well, I would say a point guard, and the good thing about this draft is that it's full of point guards. You can start at the top with LaMelo Ball as maybe being the highest ceiling of all of those. I like Tyrese Halliburton. I like his size and his ability. Maybe he's a different version of LaMelo Ball that runs the pick and roll a little bit better, has that outside shot. And that's my biggest knock on LaMelo Ball, is that his shot and the mechanics with it are a little bit questionable. And is he ready for the NBA prime time and the stardom that comes with that? Everybody knows him from the TV show and his dad and his brother, obviously. But is he going to be able to fit into an NBA landscape and with the mistakes that go with it at the point guard position? Because obviously for a rookie, it's just like a quarterback in the NFL. It's one of the hardest positions to break into as a rookie. And you're going to make your mistakes. You're going to take your lumps. But how do you handle that and bounce back?
Outside of the draft coming up, what do you think there's some other big off-season needs that the Pistons need to have for this upcoming year?
Well, I think it's free agency also, that you've got to look at how they want to spend the money, the free agency and the salary cap money that they have for the first time and who knows how long. You're getting Josh Smith off the books, getting some of those other bigger contracts off the books. It's going to give them some flexibility to make some other roster decisions too. And with those young guys, they have smaller contracts. That's part of the benefit, that they might have about $30 million in cap room to go out and try to get some pieces that can help to fit this roster and form the roster in a different way. How do they do that? What do they use that for? Again, that's where Troy Weaver is going to have a lot of say and is going to make the biggest impact is what he does in the draft with that, what looks to be a top 5 pick. And then in free agency, what he does with the little bit of money that they have, whether he chooses to use it on a player or two that have bigger contracts, or if he just uses it to take on bad contracts and maybe bring in some additional draft compensation with that. Maybe a team gives you a bad contract with a first round pick attached to it. That seems to be the way that they might want to do things if they don't spend it all on 1 or 2 players.
We're going to go back a little bit to when the season was happening. I wanted to know, what was your reaction with when the Pistons traded Andre Drummond? Just want to know what did you think about that, getting a lot of the salary off?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a surprise because it felt like they were going for it. They were still going to try to make the playoffs just before that. But then that was the true sign that things were going to start to change, that was the first big piece to come off. And certainly with Blake Griffin injured, they didn't have the sign in the form that it was going to be a big playoff run at all. But that was kind of the watershed moment when they said, hey, we've got to rebuild. We've got to get this contract off the books. That if Andre Drummond opted in, which he ended up doing with the Cavs anyway, that was $28 million that you were going to have to suck up and deal with. And again, that's almost all of the money that they have in free space now. So if they would have been using that on Andre Drummond, would have been an issue. It would have, again, handcuffed them to the direction that they were going in. And it felt a little bit like they were as good as they were going to get with Drummond. There wasn't much more ceiling that they could get through with Drummond. And again, that bloated contract, if you don't have the other pieces to go with it, you're just going to be treading in quicksand.
Our last question here before we end it here. I just want to know, since the Palace was officially demolished last week, I just want to know, do you have a favorite Palace memory, either Pistons related, if you went to a concert or something like that, and anything that maybe stuck out to you?
Well, I mean, there was a Janet Jackson concert. The Pistons memories are more the last season or two when they retired Richard Hamilton's jersey and Ben Wallace's jersey and Chauncey Billups' jersey. Those 2 nights when they brought all of those guys back together, and it was just a festive atmosphere. And the Palace just never was a bad arena. Even the last season that they played there, it was still probably in the top half of the 30 arenas in the NBA. It was styled and decorated and designed very, very well. The suites and everything, it didn't look run down. It just felt more like a basement than anything else because of the concrete kind of design. But functionally, it just wasn't a bad arena. And so when you look at some of the new ones that were built, they still weren't as good as what the Palace was, even after 30 years almost that it had been in existence.
It's a good point there. So thank you again to Rod Beard, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit News. You can check him out at DetroitNews.com or on Twitter at DET News. Rod Beard, thank you so much, Rod, again for your time.
Anytime. I appreciate it, Noah.
We want to thank Rod Beard for joining us here on Open Mic Night again. And what an interview that was. He's very knowledgeable about the Pistons, very well-versed, and what a really, really good conversation about this team and what the future could hold. So thanks again to Rod Beard. Very, very good interview there. I want to thank you again for joining us here on the podcast, courtesy of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. Check out some of their other content. They got some cool podcasts, obviously Doc and Jock, the famous one. They got a wrestling podcast, the Fan Report, Michigan football podcast. Even Adam Strozinski has one called The Throwback, where they throw it back to the 2012 Lions season, an abysmal 4-12 year, but it's worth rewatching just for the pure mediocrity of it. So it's an interesting one to listen to, and I've been having a lot of fun here. First ever intern for the podcast network, and it's been fun editing all the content and doing my own podcast here. So it's a lot of fun, and I really, really am enjoying it. Thanks to John and Adam over there with the Detroit Sports Podcast. But that'll do it for this week, folks. Make sure to tune in next week, only on Open Mic Night.